state-of-the-art glass pavilion. My name is Jake. I'm going to be narrating and assisting for Colin here today. And he's going to be the gaffer this afternoon, meaning he's going to have full creative control of the piece that we'll all be making for you today. So I know that we're going to be making a form that uses or utilizes the technique called encalmo. And encalmo is basically combining two different components of glass by sticking them together. It can be done prior to the hot shop, where it can be like sealed together or melted in a kiln. But we're going to be doing everything hot today. So we have a little cup of red heating up inside of our pickup oven over here. It's out of shot right now of the camera, but we'll see that a little bit later. So for those of you who have tuned into some of our other demonstrations or are familiar with the Glass Pavilion here, just really quickly go over a little bit of our studio space while Colin is preparing this encalmo piece here. He's just gathered a little bit of glass out of the furnace here, and he's creating just a little post. It's basically going to act like glue to stab up this little bar of color. But we saw Colin gather out of our furnace here. And this furnace is operating at 2,150 degrees Fahrenheit. The interior of this is lined with ceramic fire brick. And it's basically just a big bowl filled with clear, colorless molten glass. And the glass inside there is all clear. It's just so hot at 2150 that it emits its own heat light, and it's a very similar to viscosity to honey when it's at that temperature as well. So it's basically a big pot of honey inside of here. And then we have our pipe warmer heating up a wide variety of our stainless steel and other steel blow pipes and punty rods. This is preheating them to a temperature that makes the glass a little bit happier, and it wants to stick to it a little bit easier that way. And then we have our reheating chambers that we can use to get the glass back up to the working temperature once it's pulled out of that furnace there. So I'm going to have up the bar of red. I'm going to come right back. And this is just a little cup of red glass. Stabbed that up. That is was holding at 918 degrees inside of that little pickup box. We need to preheat that glass in order for it to actually stick to any glass that we pull out of our furnace. If we were to stick onto that colored cup when it was cold, it would shock the glass quickly and cause it to burn. It's just a little bit of prep work here, making sure that this is nice and cleaned off. It can pick up some kiln dust, which is from a wash that we use to coat our ceramic plates. So we just have to make sure that bit of clear glass that he's going to make is going to be the exact same width. We want them to come together perfectly even. So he's just going to do a little bit more prep work here to this, and then he'll most likely be handing it to me, and I'll be making sure that everything stays nice and warm but not too hot while he goes ahead and gets ready to gather more clear glass onto another pipe. What more do you have to do to it, Colin? Looks good. So it's nice and stable. We can see that this cup is glowing a little bit on one side on the very end, and that's a good indicator. We want it just about this heat when we go to stick it. So I'm going to take care of this. We have our second reheating chamber on, and we can use this what we call a short flash, or just a very short heat, just to make sure that it doesn't dip below a certain temperature. In this reheating chamber, the entire time Colin is getting ready, by the time he's ready, it's just going to be a puddle of glass at the bottom of that drum. So I'm just going to do a balance of being in the outside room temperature and then slowly introducing it for short periods of time into this 2,000 degree reheating chamber. So Colin is going ahead and taking another gather out of our furnace. When he gathers, he plunges that glass down inside, or plunges the pipe down into the glass, and he does a couple full rotations, and the glass will wind up onto the pipe. And he's taken what we call a double dip. And that double dip is just maybe about a gather and a half of glass. He takes one gather, doesn't allow it to fully cool down to the point where it's stable to take a full amount on the second gather. So this is about a gather and a half. And now he's rolling that on our marvering table. It's just a carbon steel table that we can use to shape and cool the glass simultaneously. It's a very, very versatile tool. It's a really nice one to have in your studio. Pretty much every glass studio is going to have a marvering table in it. And he's also just now inflated air into that glass. So now we have a hollow form on the end of the pipe. And now Colin's just going to prepare this little bit of glass here to be able to be stuck to our little cup that we have on the end of my pipe. A really handy tool that we have is a newspaper, just a common newspaper folded up into thirds a couple times. We use this to shape the glass. So he squeezed down and condensed it a little bit because it comes up and wants to open up the tip of this glass to make sure that the bubble blows all the way to the tip. So by using that paper to kind of condense the sides down and blowing afterward, that kind of allows the bubble to travel more towards the tip and not outward, or expanding outward. So to open that tip, Colin's just going to use the tweezers to pull and stretch the bubble out a little bit. And that's just creating an easier point for us to get the blades of our jacks over it so we can squeeze down and create a little constriction line. And that constriction line is basically just going to act as a bit of a weak point. It's going to tell the glass where we want it to break. So it's kind of using a variety of tools to apply a bit of cold steel to the glass just to really cool it down. I'm going to take a quick flash here on this, and I'm just going to come over and help him knock that little bit off. So I've still got the cup in my one hand, a little bit more cold steel on it with the diamond shears, and then a little vibration just breaks that little bit free. And now we have an opening at the tip of that bubble. Alrighty. So I'm going to continue to maintain the temperature of this little cup here, and Colin's going to go ahead and open this up, flare it open. You want me to paddle for you real quick? Boosting a little bit of extra heat where the cup is going to connect to that little body of clear glass that he has. Grab this little paddle here, and we're just going to glide back and forth with it, just to make sure that that seam or that little lip is nice and flat, so it's going to seal nice and cleanly. Now that we have that open, you can use his calipers just to check and make sure that the diameter is correct and it's the same as our cup here. Sure. So now before we go to stick it, we're just going to do what we call a price check, or just to double check and make sure that it's pretty close in size. So I'm just going to bring it over to him and he's just going to take a look. A little wider. So again, I'm just going to maintain this and slowly start to build the heat up around the lip of this small cup. And he just has to do one more quick flare with his jacks. Just going in and using a little bit of upward force and slowly opening the blades. I'm just going to widen that up a little bit more. Okay. So he's just signaled to me that we should be good to go, so I'm just going to give this one last little heat on the lip. but not get it too hot. I don't really want to deform the shape. I just want the glass to be tacky. Yep. So we're both just making sure that our points of connection are nice and warm. And I'm going to bring this over to him. So I'm going to bring my back end at a bit of a lower angle. I'm going to flip it. He's going to stick, and then we're just going to slowly lift up that back angle. Now that we're sealed, we can just go ahead and gently put a little bit of pressure on that, and then a little tap on this pipe breaks that cup free. And that's successful installment. It's the attaching portion. So now we just need to smooth all of this out just by introducing heat, slowly building it up into the center of the object where that seam is connected at. And then we can use a variety of different methods. Marver is a pretty quick and effective tool in being able to do that. Just by rolling back and forth here, we can kind of push that seam together and make it almost appear as though it's seamless. See that he's starting to boost the heat back up into that front portion, the cup that I had. It's really starting to glow in that end. And that's because that bit of glass is the first bit of glass in and the last bit of glass out of that heat. So it's always going to be the hottest portion of the glass. We have a couple torches at the bench that we could also use to boost the illuminating in the center, but this is a little bit smaller. So we don't necessarily need to worry about utilizing a torch or some other way of boosting heat into one area. And that's kind of one of the reasons why when you do you don't have to, but it's a little bit easier to keep the form a little bit more squat when doing it. So this little cup here had a tiny opening at the very tip of it when we stuck it. So I'm assuming Colin's going to be squatting this up. Kind of getting it back into a little bit more of a controllable shape, not as long off of the pipe. And he's just going to use the blades of his jacks and kind of slowly begin to push inward a little bit and blow very lightly at the same time. And he's kind of righting the seam. Excellent. Just going to push that together a little bit more. We're just going to try to squat this up a little bit more, and then you will be taking a gather over this, correct? And then, so once we get the bubble kind of situated where we want it a little bit better, it's always better to have your, if you're going to gather on what you have on the pipe, it's better to leave that bubble a little bit squatter before you take that final gather. It's not until you have all of the material that you need out of the furnace that you really want to begin to start elongating the glass, just because it gets too thin, too far off the pipe, and it's really, really difficult to control. So we could maybe gather on top of this, but it would be a little bit risky. So Colin's using this newspaper to push the glass back onto the pipe, and you can see it has gotten water, and it's kind of out the sides a little bit. As opposed to being a long, thin cylinder, you've got a little bit of an ovoid shape. And he's still trying to get the seam melted out a little bit more. That's a really important step when doing encolment, is making sure that, at least if you're going to gather over it, you want to make sure the seam is completely flush, because that air, the air that's going to be trapped in it, is just caused by gathering over more clear glass. It flows like water, but not like water. So if there's like an indent or a crevice in the glass, when you go to gather over it, it's going to flow over top of that crevice and not into it, just because it's a little thicker than less fluid than, say, water. It would fill any, it fills any volume. So just a couple more heats here. Maybe very gently inflating it a little bit. Gone, but we're going to maybe do one more heat and one more heat by kind of pushing it back in a little bit, and then we should be ready to take another gather out of our furnace. I may have forgot to mention at the beginning of the demonstration, but if there are any questions that anybody might have, we can type them in the chat. We can put them on the camera here, and he can let me know if anybody has any questions. We'd be happy to answer them. Once again with the newspaper, just kind of very, very gently pushing the glass back onto the pipe. And this is a little bit better of a shape to gather over top of. As we're kind of pushing the glass back, it also thickens it up a tiny bit. And every time we heat the glass up, it's expanding. It's going to gain a little bit more thickness, so that's going to give it a little bit more stability. Take a nice large gather out of our furnace over here. So he's about ready here. So I'm just going to go ahead and do making the furnace. This here, piece of steel on a handle, and this allows me to push any bubbles that may be on the tank or at the very surface of the tank to the back. So that way we don't gather any unnecessary bubbles into the glass. So we got our furnace raked here. And now we're going to go ahead and take another So just like before, Cullen's going to go in, dip past the level of the glass with his bubble, do a couple rotations, and he's going to do a strip gather. So by angling downward with that fresh molten material, any excess is going to jump. Now he's going to go to the pipe. Grab and get good. There we go. Swirly. And that could have been way worse if we maybe hadn't condensed the bubble. The reason why we lost a little bit of control there was just because the wall thickness was very, very thin close to the pipe. It just got very, very heated up by that new fresh layer of molten material. And it just wanted to drip really, really drastically. So now that we have a bit of a skin on the surface of the bubble here using that newspaper, it's taking another heat to make sure that all of the layers of glass are one even temperature, and then we can begin to inflate this a little bit better now. We don't have any inconsistencies. So that newspaper, once again, submerged in water. We use it to shape and cool the glass. We can use it to our advantage, the versatility of it, the fact that we can use it to kind of contort our hand and shape the glass, cool it down in certain areas. And he's just very, very lightly blowing, using it to keep the thickness where we want it. Marver. So now that we kind of have the bubble inflated where we need it, we have the glass dispersed evenly. The majority of the thickness is towards the tip of the bubble, and that's going to be the bottom of our piece here. So He's going to now go to our marking table and use that tool to kind of solidify where the thickness is going to maintain on the tip of that bubble. Inflate a little bit more. Yep. So we can see that's going to instantly freeze up that glass. Pipe. The bubble is going to inflate everywhere that did not come into contact with the steel. And that's a way to set us up for a nice even disbursement of glass, making sure that it's staying nice and thick at the bottom. On the bench here, the jacks, and that's going to basically be a point where we can isolate the stress into the material and allow it to break cleanly when we go to transfer it to another pipe. So using the paper just to center it up a little bit more, inflate a tiny bit, and then he's going to go on with the jacks and begin to squeeze. As he rolls back and forth, he gently increases his pressure. We never want to start too hard of a squeeze when we start a neckline, because it's actually the revolutions that we take on the bench here that create that nice, clean, circular carve into the glass. Now that we have that constricted down, we can now begin to shape the piece a little bit more. So if Colin wanted to make a lower form, he would squat the bubble up. He would allow it to inflate more on the sides and allow the bubble to squish down on itself. But I think he's going to be making a little bit taller of a form, so we're actually going to do the opposite. Instead of hanging the pipe upward and allowing the glass to squat itself while turning, we're going to drop downward and allow gravity to pull. So now kind of slowly angling downward, we can see the shape of the bubble changing slightly. And we maybe do that one more time. Just kind of slowly focusing the heat into the vessel further and further back, or closer to the tip where the majority of the thickness remains. Nice. So now that we can now begin to do any more inflating or blowing into the piece. And again, just using that newspaper to kind of move the glass where we want it. Looks like Colin's going for more of an oval shape. Narrowing down the tip of the bubble. And now we have this fluffy torch. The fluffy torch gets its name because it gives a really broad and fluffy flame, kind of heating a large portion of the material. It's not going to get it extremely hot with just the torch alone, but it's a nice tool to kind of boost a little bit of extra heat into a pretty decent sized portion of the glass. So we want the upper portion here to heat up a little bit faster than the rest. So that's where that tool is really, really effective in doing that. So he goes in for a flash, maybe a little bit longer, maybe like a short heat, to build up some heat in the clear portion of the glass. Because we had to put that entire body of glass into the reheating chamber, he's using that paper on the very bottom because he doesn't want that area to expand. That fluffy torch was used at more of the portion closest to the pipe because we want that area to inflate. So just to be sure that the tip of the bubble doesn't inflate, he just utilizes that paper while he's blowing a little bit. Are you going to be putting it in this? So happy with this shape. This is all the shaping that we're going to be doing on this. So now we need to put the space flat spot on the tip of our bubble. Grab this cherry wood paddle one more time. This paper here to kind of prevent the sides from pushing in. I'm just applying a gentle pressure to the tip of the bubble. This is just going to make a nice little flat spot. Those are a little bit more abrasive and cooling the glass down because they're that So now we're going to switch over and flip the piece 180 using one of our step-down punty rods. So we can see this pipe here is still glowing nice and red. Colin's going to show you the piece. We're going to be connecting a pipe to this tip of this bubble here. We have this pipe here called a step down. Whoops, get it in the camera. You can see it has a step down from the majority of the rest of the pipe. I'm going to take a little gather on this and shape that up. So the shape of a punty, there's a million different ways to make a punty, and it's all kind of dependent on what you need it for. But we've kind of figured out a punty shape that works really well for when you're doing pretty much anything. And this punty is, obviously, when we're done with the piece, we need to break it off. So we need the punty to fail, but we need it to fail on our terms. We need it to break and give the piece up to us at the very end of the process. So we have a very particular shape that we go for, where it's tapered to the pipe with a bit of a dome of glass on the end with a pointy tip right at the very center. This is maybe not the pointiest, but this is something roughly of what we're looking at here. Tapered to the pipe with a dome on the end. So now that we have this shaped up, I'm going to go ahead and boost a little bit. But not very similar to how we attach those two cups together. We just want this bit of glass to be tacky. I bring the punty over to Colin. He guides that on center with his tweezers. Sorry, that could have been a little hotter. And now he's just looking for center. He's just turning slowly, checking to make sure there's no high points in the pipe. Yep, good. And now he's just going to use a little bit of cold water here to thermally shock the glass. And then a little tap on the pipe breaks it free just like that, and we have a successful transfer. So now I'm just going to gently flash the piece a little bit, because that was previously just cold enough to break. So I'm just slowly introducing it back into the heat. Make sure the stress fracture doesn't run down the side of the piece or anything like that. And then I'm just bring this back to Colin. It's a little warm. Sorry. Stainless steel pipes. So now he's just centering the piece here with his tweezers while he still has a little bit of heat in that punty. The piece is still moving and teetering a bit. direction area that was closest to the pipe now, or what was connected to the pipe. And we're going to get this to the point where it's molten again. We're going to see the differential in heat when we come out from the furnace and back to the bench. But it's really hard to tell that color difference, obviously, in this reheating chamber where it's all glowing nice and orange. So Colin is looking for, because we're using a transparent color, it makes it a lot easier to see the opening through the shape of the piece. So he's looking for that edge to begin to round over, and he's also looking for movement. He's turning to the right, so when the piece heats up a bit, he notices the direction of the glass kind of lagging behind his turning. And this heat is usually one of the longer in the process, just because we had to cool that down significantly to break it. We can see this edge is now nice and rounded over where it was connected to the pipe, and now he can use the tweezers to pull away any excess, thin it out, and also add a little bit of length to the form. He can maybe do this one more time. It's all about the slow buildup in heat. So after we connect to the punty, we normally always want to take a short flash when we go up to do any shaping or manipulating of one area. We take a short flash on the way back from the bench, and then we take a short flash on the way to the bench. And that's just to ensure that the punty doesn't cool down too much. Because if the punty cools down too much, we run the risk of it cracking and breaking and losing the piece. So once again, he goes with the tweezers, pinches and pulls, and he's going to trim it. So he's using a pair of straight shears to just go on the lip there and trim away that excess glass. There's different ways that we can still the So I'm just going to go on with this cherry wood paddle here and just do a nice gentle press. And this is just to make sure that the lip is nice and even. Nice. What do you think of that? One more shape? So fit? All right, so now that we have the lip established and we have it nice and even, Colin's going to introduce a little bit more air into this piece. And if you're wondering how we do it, we're not connected to a blowpipe. We have a specific tool for that. And it's what we call the Soffietta. It's this tool here. And this is one of the few tools that allow us to introduce and inflate air into the piece once it's off of the blowpipe. We could also use what we call a steam stick, and that's a way that we can inflate the glass, but this is just a little bit better because you can really control how much pressure you're blowing into the pipe. So you can see by just doing that little bit of pressure, he was able to round that shoulder back out. But because that cone was just pressed up against the lip and he blew, it kind of pushed in the lip just a tiny bit, which is normal. So we'll just do a little bit more doctoring to it to even the shape back out, and then we'll have a finished piece. So once again, just using the blades on the outside, lifting upward, and I'm just going on with this little paddle here, Make sure the lip stays nice and parallel with the base. Excellent. I'm sure he's just looking it over to decide what he wants to do next. One more shape. One more quick shape, and then we'll have a final piece. So once a piece gets this wide, we have to be really, really careful about the speed of your turning. Centrifugal force plays a big role in glass blowing, obviously, because we're turning from a center point. So he's being very, very deliberate and slow with his turning here. So that way it doesn't flare out that rapidly. And now we can use this newspaper here to really kind of push the glass and even it out to make sure that wall flows nicely. Nice. And now we have, I would assume, our final form here. So now we're going to go ahead and slowly flash the piece down, allow it to get to one even temperature, and then we'll be able to break it off of the pipe. So Colin's using that torch there to boost a little bit of excess heat into the punty connection. And that's going to be building up a little bit more stress into it, make it break off a little bit cleaner. And while he's doing that, I'm just heating up a pair of Kevlar gloves, and these are going to allow me to handle the glass for just a brief period of time, from when we break it off the pipe to when we load it into our annealing oven. So what Colin is looking for is for the piece to begin to have a slight tilt at that point of connection. And it looks like he's ready to go. So I'm just gonna make sure these have a final little boost of heat in them. And he's gonna walk it over to our knockoff table. And this knockoff table is lined with a heat-resistant fire blanket called Fiberfrax. And then there we have our final shape. And now it's safe inside of our annealing oven. So the process of annealing is basically just allowing the glass to even out in temperature. It's holding at 918 degrees. And like I said, that's a really stable temperature for the glass to rest at. It doesn't heat up to the point where it's going to slump and deform, and it doesn't cool down to the point where it could induce any thermal shock. So it could rest there for a while and go relatively unchanged, but we want to get it out as soon as possible. So at the end of the day, we're just going to press a button in our control panel, and it's going to slowly ramp down over the course of about 16 hours or so. The cycle or the time that it takes to anneal glass is solely dependent on the thickness of the material and also the type of glass that it is, whether it's soda lime glass like we have in our studio here, or quartz glass or borosilicate. They all kind of play a different role in the annealing of the material. But for those of you who are familiar with the Glass Pavilion in our collection, you all probably know about the solid glass bench in our ancient gallery. That glass is 3 foot thick, casted into sand, and that piece took about 11 months to anneal fully. And that's an extremely long time, but again, that extreme thickness of the glass really determines how long it's going to take to cool it down. So this is a very important part, and very important part of our process is annealing, but it's into the more scientific area of glass making. So we thank you all so much for joining us. We would like to go ahead and thank our sponsors, Owens, Illinois and Welltower, for making these live demonstrations possible. Do we have any questions? No questions? Well, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the live stream, feel free to share the video. They'll be posted up onto our YouTube channel afterward, so that way you'll be able to view them whenever you'd like. So if you enjoyed, please share, leave any other comments, and we'd be happy to answer them the next time we have our demonstrations. We're doing them Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at 2 p.m., and we're hoping to open them up a little bit more in the coming weeks. So thank you all so much. We appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day.